Joining us is the Russian ambassador for India, Tanis Alipov. I'll get to my first question straight, Ambassador. So in the recent Voice for Global Summit, the Foreign Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, he said that globalization in its current form is not perfect and that countries in the world's south must develop a new way forward. So how do you envision Russia's role in this new system?
Good afternoon, and I'm happy to be with you. You know, I would agree with this assessment. It looks like that the Western-centric world order is gradually coming to an end, even if that's not clear to some. It primarily because it doesn't address the demand of the majority of states for a more just and a more equal multipolar power dispensation and democracy and global governance. Indeed, we currently witness the shifting of focus of political and economic decision-making to the south and to the east. Russia consistently supports this trend together with India and other BRICS and the SCO member countries. India is a rapidly growing power and will play a never bigger role in global affairs. It's a respected nation, recognized for its independent and responsible policy. It is pursuing justice in international affairs to ensure an equal access to natural, financial and technological resources, the access of the global south to these resources as a necessity for successful sustainable development. This approach is at the core of the current Indian G20 presidency, which Russia is supporting.
There's already a successful alternate logistics corridor between Russia and India, the Vladivostok-Chennai sea route. Do you expect more developments of such projects between the two countries?
We've been developing the prospective transport corridors for quite some time already. The ones that are economically feasible, time and cost effective. It's the Vladivostok-Chennai maritime sea route, which you mentioned, but also the international north-south transport corridor. The importance of these routes is even more increasing now to ensure that our trade is independent from arbitrary interference. The Vladivostok-Chennai maritime route is of great significance to facilitate the Indian access to the Russian Far East, including its rich natural and industrial potential. I would recall that the Russia-India summit in 2019 gave a huge impetus to go ahead with that. Important thing is that it also facilitates the Indian outreach to the Arctic and the infrastructure and energy projects there, including the Northern Sea Route, the Vostok oil cluster, and other projects. We pay increasing attention to the INSTC as the shortest way from India to Russia and further to Europe, reducing transportation time to around 20-24 days as compared to about 40 days through the Suez Channel. Now its capacity stands at about 15 million tons a year, which we plan to double by 2030. It also involves multilateral infrastructure development, customs, satellite navigation, telecommunication lines, so that we ensure the seamless movement of goods. implementation of these projects will certainly make the whole of Eurasia more interconnected, will expedite the integration initiatives as well as contribute to raise the efficiency of the Eurasian Economic Union, also keeping in mind that there is a negotiation process about the FTA of the Eurasian Economic Union with Iran and India. Clearly, it would be a huge step towards the implementation of the Greater Eurasia Partnership proposed by President Vladimir Putin.
Aspects you see to further cooperation with Asian and African countries? Also, could we see strengthening of already existing institutions such as BRICS and the SCO, for example?
That's the very same thing we do advocate. Cooperation in BRICS and the SCO is based on equal and mutually beneficial partnership, as well as a common desire for democracy and global affairs. The central role of the UN and the international law. We don't accept the neo-colonial policy promoted by by Western countries labeled as rules-based order to camouflage the desire to retain a decisive say in global affairs. A rather cunning idea, I must admit, seemingly allowing others to participate in creation of those rules. The hegemony of the US must end. This notion, from my point of view, is getting more and more attractive for many countries and explains their desire and intention to join BRICS and the SCO. The expansion of these associations is only a matter of time. It's already going on in the SCO with Iran and Belarus to become new members in 2023, this year and next year, respectively. In BRICS, the dialogue on expansion is going on too. At the moment, the South African presidency in BRICS is promoting the focus on cooperation with Africa, supporting its development initiatives, integration and trade liberalization processes. We also appreciate a huge attention to Africa that Indian G20 presidency is paying. Naturally, bigger involvement, Asian and African countries in the leading multilateral institutions will greatly serve their development purposes and contribute to raising their global profile.
India has been under constant pressure from the Western countries to take a tough stance against Russia after the conflict in Ukraine. How has this affected your relationship with other states? Also, do you think that India will continue to stay on its path of independent foreign policy?
You know, the whole world has witnessed the failure of Western efforts to pressure India. India has succeeded in maintaining an independent and balanced position, rejecting unilateral illegitimate restrictions violating the international law. I think it's more a vivid reflection of the gradual end of the Western hegemony than of anything else. This firm stand is based on India's principled line with regard to the sanctions policy in general, which cannot be a solution to bilateral or global problems. India gives priority to its national interests, including in relation to the current global food and energy crises caused by the pandemic in the first place, and by the Western sanctions against Russia in the second. Multi-vector approach is at the core of India's concept of strategic autonomy. and I would very much like to see India stay on this course.
What happens when you mix digital games with actual physical sports? Something like digital? The answer is yes.
Kazan is preparing to host the first ever Games of the Future, a cyber contest with a physical dimension. One of the innovators, Igor Stolyarov, is on the verge of redefining sports and gaming. He tells us what's behind this synergy and if it's the future.
The Chagos Archipelago, home of the Chagosians, Diego Garcia, the largest island in the archipelago, is now the location of a very large U.S. military base.
UK government give our island to the US government to make a military base and just deported all the Chagosian people from their country so they can't return back on the island.
Never.
Never, but we are fighting. That's why we are fighting for the rights of return.
We do not consider that the right of self-determination actually applies to the Chagosians. And on the question of self-determination, the legal advice we've received is actually the Chagosians were not and are not a people.
For me, it's time to move on and see what we can do for the Chagosian community to return back home.
There's no support from the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees.
United Nations don't care about Chagosian people.
We don't feel attitude and the relationship has changed. We are very happy that, the older generation of Indians, they all remember those heydays of the Soviet-Indian friendship. The younger generation certainly doesn't know much about Russia, which is not somebody's fault in particular. It's a general situation in which nobody is to blame, but the overall attitude has not changed. Of course, India is not comfortable with the current situation in Europe. Nobody is comfortable. We are suffering in the first place. Russia, Ukraine. We didn't want that turn of events in the first place. And in fact, we, for at least 15 years prior to 2022, when the escalation happened, tried to impress on Europe and the US, which has the decisive influence on Europe, to sit together and work out a security formula that would be acceptable to all, because we felt that the Russian security was threatened by the expansion of NATO. That was the major reason for the escalation. And all our proposals, all our goodwill intentions, they were rejected outright. Now, as we see and, various political leaders make revelations, former leaders in Europe, or like the Israeli Prime Minister, there were no such plans in the West from the beginning. They, in fact, deceived Russia very bluntly, in a very unpartnership manner, and ultimately wanted to proceed with those aggressive plans so that our position on the global stage is diminished and suffers. confirms our assessments that something is not right with the Western attitude towards Russia.
Lavrov has pointed out that NATO countries are seeking to increase border tensions between New Delhi and Beijing. Now, A, how do you think NATO is doing this? And B, how concerned are you and your colleagues about the dispute here?
The India-China border problem is a purely bilateral matter, right? Russia doesn't interfere, and no one is expected to either. The two parties are mature enough to and capable of resolving the situation on their own, using the existing dialogue and consultations mechanisms. It would take a deteriorating, removable, a destroyed security situation in Europe after the Cold War as an example. NATO's negative role is evident. Despite Russia's objections, the bloc continued its expansion eastwards, creating a direct threat to the Russian security. Stating its defensive nature, NATO chose offensive actions against Russia. So similarly, its attempts to spread its influence to the Asia-Pacific should not mislead anyone. With Russia and China as two obvious adversaries, there are less obvious targets as well, like the unity of the region at large. In our perception, it's going to divide the region, will jeopardize its unified agenda and the equal and undivided security architecture, a nation-centered architecture. There will be more alienation lines and instability, and it certainly doesn't suit the interests of any of the nations there, including India and China.
In the backdrop of rising tensions in the global arena and the pressure on India to condemn Russia, how do you think the trade between the two countries is going?
The sanctions war against Russia has in fact had an opposite effect and accelerated the Russia-India trade. As you know, last year it grew almost 3.5 times and reached about 35 billion USD. A record level. The lion's share belongs to oil and coal and fertilizers and the metal supplies from Russia. Indian exports are still far behind, that is true. We're working intensely to balance it. It's important that there is a widespread interest from private sector, the regional business, small and medium-scale business is getting more active. The tourist flow to India shows promising dynamics and is increasing. So the scope of opportunities for India to expand its presence in the Russian market has increased dramatically in almost all segments of industry. And it would be wise for the Indian business to make use of them.
Now, Russia has been a long-time energy partner of India. Do you see this partnership growing?
I hope that it will continue and will expand, and not only on the supplies front. We're talking here about the expansion of joint investment projects in both countries, including the development of the Vostok oil, which I mentioned earlier, and other promising hydrocarbon fields in the Russian Far East and in the Arctic. We're also talking about petrochemicals and energy processing projects in India. Let's not forget that Russian investments, which amounted to 13 billion USD in 2017, were the largest ever in investments in the energy sector of India. ONGC Corporation owns a 20% stake in the Sakhalin-1 project. Indian companies are widely represented in the development of the Vankor field in Russia, in the Tars-Yurak project also. The Imperial Energy Group of companies operates in the Tomsk region. And as for the spike of energy purchases, in 2022 Russia has become the largest oil supplier of India, and our share in local crude imports has exceeded 25%. And of course, let's not forget about the extensive, leading cooperation in the nuclear power sector. We've been the only country to implement such projects in India with the construction of the Kudankulam nuclear power plant.
Talking of the defense partnership between New Delhi and Moscow, India's always been a major buyer of Russian military equipment. How important is India to Russia's military export market?
Very important. No doubt about that. The level of the Russia-India defense cooperation remains unprecedented. And it's not much possibly about the numbers than about the overall extension of cooperation. Russia offers the maximum level of transfer of advanced technologies where other players are still hesitant. We don't condition our defense cooperation to politics. There have been very practical results, like the exceptional BrahMos supersonic missiles manufacturing, the joint projects that we have, the AK-203 rifles, joint venture, the licensed production of tanks, of aircraft, of various armaments and components, all in compliance with the Make in India and Self-Reliant India programs. And right at the moment, Russia is taking an active part in the Aero India defense show in Bangalore, where we have a large delegation present with the representation of various defense manufacturing companies offering a variety of products and joint collaboration projects in aircraft industry, in anti-missile warfare, offering the portable missile launchers and the other advanced equipment. We are very optimistic about the continuation of our close engagement in this important sector.
Thanks very much, Ambassador.